Yes, once again it's my top 12, and our guest this week is someone who's all too seldom been able to visit his own country in the past few years. From Jethro, Tull, Ian Anderson. Ian, I'm glad you were able to make it this time.
Back with a vengeance,
Indeed. Let's get pretty smartly into your first choice of music. What's it going to be?
Well, a song I heard on Top of the Pops, believe it or not, about 2 years ago. Very impressed at the time, and of course they've become very well known now. Queen, the 7 Seas of Rye.
I'm very surprised, actually, Ian, that of all the guests we've had on this show, very, very few have even mentioned, let alone chosen music by Queen. I would have thought they were one of the more impressive of the new bands, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they certainly have an incredible professionalism in the studio, and obviously very exciting on record. I've never seen them live, so I'm, a bit in the dark, but very impressive group.
Tremendous band, right. Well, if we can, at this point, speak sort of generically of your whole selection of music, I was, again, a little bit surprised to find most of it was, what should we say, fairly old British pop material, not very much in line with the sort of music you play yourself.
Yeah, I really have very, very little enjoyment. I've never had much enjoyment from the American artists, apart from my own origins in sort of urban blues of America.
Yes, yes.
But leaving that aside, I really have always enjoyed the British artists the best, and the one we're going to hear next, particularly because he came around at a time when dear old Cliff was copying Elvis,
right,
and Marty Wilde was copying somebody else, and all the rest of it. But he was peculiarly British at the time, very indigenous song. John Barry's well-executed string arrangements, which we'll refer to in one of the latest songs.
But yes, though I think before we go any further, wouldn't you allow that those arrangements of John Barry's were very much a knockoff of what Buddy Holly was doing at the time?
Well, I don't know. I think I've heard the stories of John Barry's early sessions about, vast orchestras walking away after about 8 hours in the studio with blood pouring from their fingertips. He made them do all this pizzicato
That's right.
stuff, you see. In fact, we recently did the same thing on our new record, and it was a definite throwback to the John Barry thing, but we let them go after an hour and a half, and they only had blisters. But, yes, perhaps you're right, you know.
Nevertheless, I would agree something very British about Adam's delivery.
Certainly his vocal style, you know,
Right.
and I'm very sorry that he still isn't singing, and he's seems to decide to be a full-time actor again, but good singer, good singer.
What do you want if you don't want money? What do you want if you don't want gold? Say what you want and we'll give it you, darling. Wish you wanted my love, baby. What do you want if you don't want earning? What do you want if you don't want love? Say what you want and I'll give it you, darling. Wish you wanted my love, baby. Well, I'm offering you this heart of mine, but all you do is play it through. What do you want, oh boy, you're making a fool of me. One of these days when you need my kissing, one of these days when you want me to, don't turn around, 'cause I'll be missing. Now then you want my love, baby. Well, I'm offering you a diamond ring, but all you do is turn me down. What do you want, oh boy, you're going to turn on me. One of these days when you need my kissing, one of these days when you want me to, don't turn around, 'cause I'll be missing. Then you want my love, baby. Oh, well, then you want my love, baby.
Adam Faith, 1959, a time when he had, we've just been reminded, 16 top 20 hits over a 4-year period.
But that particular one's my accountant's favourite record.
Why?
Well, it's sort of, what do you want if you don't want money, boy? You know, he can't understand that I'm actually not that interested in money. He's very curious about my mental makeup.
Do you remember what you were doing when you first heard that record?
Yeah, I was watching him from the front stalls of Blackpool ABC Cinema.
Yes.
Yes, and I mean, actually, you see, strangely, Adam Faith was the first performer I'd ever seen, you know, from the known names of the time, and I suppose at the age of, what, 13, something like 12, 13, you know, he, in a way, sort of inspired me to have, or set my sights on that kind of a thing as a career.
What were you doing in Blackpool at that time?
Well, that's where I lived. Yes, that's where I was at school.
You weren't born there, were you?
No, born in Edinburgh.
No.
Born in Dunfermline, lived in Edinburgh, but, you know, from the age of 12 on, it was Blackpool.
Yeah.
And puberty. And, you know, it took me a while to get over all that, actually.
You decided, did you, from that you wanted to be a singer or musician?
Well, I didn't really know what I wanted to do,
No.
but, I mean, something about that life seemed to appeal. But, of course, my life in music has been very much a different. It's not been so much the showbiz thing, although I have certain critics who might argue with that.
Yes,
but,
I think you have.
But at the same time, you know, there's once you're on the stage, it all amounts to the same thing. You're there on the spot and you're doing it for real every night, as we're doing this for real.
Yes.
And, you know, you survive by your wits, as indeed Adam Faith has done, because he's still with us today.
Certainly. Did you do any other form of work after leaving school, before going into music?
Yes, I sold New Musical Express and Melody Maker from the newspaper stand in a department store in Blackpool for 6 months before I got into art school. I ran away from grammar school when I was 16, you see.
Yeah.
I was terrified about, you know, all of this university business they were grooming me for. I actually tried to join the police force, believe it or not. I went along at the age of 15 to sign up to be in the police cadets, you see, the next year, and they wouldn't let me in.
Aren't you glad?
Sort of, but at the time I was mortally wounded because, you know, I had 8 O-levels, and the reason they wouldn't let me in is because I had too many O-levels, they said, and that took me a while to work that one out.
Yes, I should imagine it did.
They'll accept you if you've got 3 O-levels, but if you've got 8, then they're very suspicious why you haven't gone on to get a
Too clever.
university degree.
Yeah,
and everything,
right.
So they wouldn't let me in at all.
Let's move on to your next choice then.
I was only 5'4" as well, by the way.
Well, that didn't help. What are you going to have next?
Oh, well, another one. This is from actually when I was playing by this time and just beginning to play the guitar and sort of think about music, from Johnny Kidd, who I think is every contemporary musician's sort of favourite from the old days, you know. Because he really got into the very heavy theatrical thing, waving his sword about and doing all that.
That's right.
But doing it with a certain style, you know, shaking all over Johnny Kidd and the Pirates.
When you move in right up close to me, that's when I get the shakes all over me. Quivers down the backbone, I got the shakes down the knee bone. Yeah, the tremors in the thigh bone, shaking all over. Just the way that you say goodnight to me brings that feeling on inside of me. Quivers down the backbone, I got the shivers down the thigh bone. Yeah, the tremors in my backbone, shaking all over. Quivers down the backbone, yeah, it shakes in the knee bone. I got the tremors in the thigh bone, shaking all over. Well, you make me shake it and I like it, baby. Well, you make me shake it and I like it, baby.
The original version of Shaking All Over Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, recently re-released, incidentally, by Cliff Bennett under another name. I'm sure you know him.
And recently re-released by Johnny Kidd.
So I'm
hope,
told,
yeah?
yes.
But
Right. But a tremendous record.
very much, yeah.
Just prior to playing that, you mentioned your stint as a newspaper salesman, and then you went to art college. Was that with any specific aim in mind?
Well, at the time, obviously, I had thought about being a painter. I just did fine art for a year, well, 2 years, and sort of ran away from that to be a musician. But obviously, I'm not the only person with that kind of a background.
No, indeed.
So-
We were just reflecting, were we not, on the number of British musicians who have come from that very field. Is there
Indeed.
any sort of general reason for this, do you think?
I suppose because art school, especially if you've come from before that a sort of fairly formal educational background, grammar school or public school or anything like that, you will have had a disciplined approach to learning.
Yes.
Been taught to absorb facts and not really taught to think so much for yourself. I regret to say, but that's the way I feel about it. Art school, however, teaches you, if anything, it teaches you the learning process because you have to really acquire it for yourself. You have to think, really. And I think hand in hand with that, there comes a certain rebellious attitude towards the system.
Yeah.
And art school is notorious for breeding, you know, not rebels in the sort of sociological sense, but in the sense that they rebel against the formal ways
Yes.
of being taught. And from that, obviously, you know, I suppose the music of the day appealed to those kind of minor rebels, and we all got involved in that as an alternative to painting, because music's so much more immediate, so much quicker, and one can see, you know, you can write a song and be playing it on stage that night, whereas a painting takes a long time to dry.
Yes. Very true. Do you still paint?
No, I've scarcely touched a brush or a pencil for about 10 years now, but I really ought to get into it, I suppose.
Well, I thought it might have provided a useful therapy away from music, or don't you need that?
I don't find that I do, but again, there are those critics who might disagree with
Well,
that.
let's not consider that.
No.
All right. So, on to track, where are we? 4 on this album.
Yeah, yes, Well, Jimi Hendrix, of course. This was, I don't know if this was actually, came right at the beginning of his career. It was certainly his first single, I think.
It was early on, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, but of course he was not the first, but possibly at the time he was the first pop star, virtuoso guitarist that we had. I mean, of real public recognition. And this song particularly, although the guitar solo I think is really quite simple by today's standards, or even the standards of Eric Clapton before him, who had been well known, it has a certain melodic content which made it, I think people first of all accepted the idea of feedback guitar and wah-wah pedals and all that, you know, became acceptable with Jimi Hendrix on a mass level instead of being an offensive noise, which it tended to be before. So, I mean, I'm thinking of Pink Floyd's early, you know, feedback things and so on. But of course, this is really a marvelous guitar-playing record. Jimi Hendrix, Hey Joe.
Jimi Hendrix, of course, and Hey Joe, one of the classics of its period. If we can jump well forward before we start talking about the very beginnings of your career, Ian, on your last LP that we've all heard, Minstrel in the Gallery, there was a greater tendency, it seems to me, to go for acoustic sounds rather than electric, overall.
Well, yes, I mean, I've always tried to mix it a bit, you know. I'm, I suppose, a failed acoustic guitar player from way back. I mean, from art school days, in fact, because that's all I could afford. But I've always had a sort of liking for the, you know, the indigenous folk sounds of Britain. But what I do now I wouldn't call folk songs or anything really like that. It's something... I suppose it's there because of a need for a dynamic range in the music, you know, that when you have all of today's vast assortment of instruments at your fingertips, just for the sake of spending a few hundred quid, you know, you can have everything, organs, drum kits, electric guitars, and what have you. It's nice to have the full dramatic range of instruments. And
is that, would you say, broadly accepted by audiences too? I mean, in concert as away from record buying?
I think providing you don't overdo it, it is, yeah. But if I was to go on and do an entirely acoustic set or something, people would be a little bit dismayed.
They don't
but they
get
like the odd
restless,
one or
though,
two.
for the odd bit here and there.
No, not we only play 2 or 3
Yeah.
in any one concert, or 2 or 3 on any one album.
Sure.
So I think it has its place there, and it's really the way I write all the songs is to sit down somewhere in usually in a hotel room, strumming an acoustic guitar and working out ideas on that.
Right.
So it's kind of true to form that some of the songs ought to remain in that style rather than become exhibition pieces for a 100-watt electric guitar.
Nothing very acoustic about our next gentleman.
Oh no, of course he's the other one of the raving guitarists,
And
the loudest E major in the business.
Right.
is Pete
And art
Townsend.
school. I was
Yes.
going to say dropout, which is totally unfair, but
Probably absolutely true for all of us, really. Yeah. But they all used to annoy me, the Who, incredibly, because they represented and were represented by the mods. And I sort of came from the other end of town. I didn't like that at all. And it used to annoy me that they smashed up guitars that I couldn't even dream about owning. Every night I found that to be horrendous, that they would destroy their equipment on stage every night. I just couldn't quite grasp that thought. But it must have been a successful ploy at the time, because I found myself, listening to and eventually enjoying this particular song. And
well, it was the sort of hymn of that generation.
of the Ready,
wasn't it?
Steady, Go era, yes, which is, very important in Britain. And it is, of course, by now you realise the Who with My Generation.
People try to put us down, talking about my generation, just because we get around. Talking about my generation, they do look awful. Talking about my generation, I hope I die before I get old. Talking about my generation, this is my generation, baby. Why don't you all fade away? Don't try to dig what we all say. I'm not trying to cause a big sensation. I'm just talking about my generation. My generation, baby. Why don't you all fade away? Don't try to dig what we all say. I'm trying to cause a big sensation. Talking about my generation. This is my generation, baby. People try to put us down, just because we get around. They do look awful cold. Yeah, I hope I die before I get old.
of course. Well, you may have picked old ones, Ian, but you certainly picked favourites, I think, for a great many people. When did the flute come into the pattern of things, as far as you were concerned?
Well, I said I couldn't afford a guitar like Pete Townsend.
Yeah.
Indeed, the only thing I could afford at the time was a flute, because they used to cost about 25 quid then. You could pick up a brand new flute for. They had the advantage of being rather small, and I was homeless and had no possessions at all, and the flute used to fit conveniently when dismantled into a coat pocket. So that was actually, seriously, you know, one of the reasons I played flute and harmonica, because they were not
portable
encumbrances at all. I mean, I could never have been a double bass player or something. It would have been out of the question, you know, taking on the tube or...
It wasn't at that time a particularly popular pop instrument, was it?
No, I think the only people who'd really used it were the Moody Blues, to an extent, and then, of course, all the jazzers. But I had some awareness of the flute as a jazz instrument from none other than Roland Kirk, how did you guess? Indeed, the first song I ever learned to play was one of Roland Kirk's, which is why it was included on our first album, and became a sort of a part of our performance at the time at the Marquee Club.
What was that?
Called Serenade to a Cuckoo, which indeed dear Roland has dedicated to me on more than one occasion when I've seen him in the last few years. But good little tune, you know, and unfortunately struck me with lots of comparisons to Roland Kirk, but I could play no other way because the pure flute tone was totally beyond me at the time when I learned. I could only play that very breathy way, so there wasn't much option, you know.
All right, let's have the final track on side one of this album.
Yeah, this is a quite a different one, I suppose. Comes from a little bit later on, from Don Van Vliet, Captain Beefheart, of course, and his Magic Band. This is the one. I don't know if this was released as a single, but I know I tried to talk him into re-releasing it about 2 or 3 years ago, but he was a bit disenchanted with it because it was one of his older songs, but a very catchy little song, certainly one of my favorites of his, called Yellow Brick Road.
The following tone is a reference tone, recorded at our operating level.
Around the corner the wind blew back, follow the yellow brick road. It ended up in black bold black, I was tossed to gift to love. Smiling children painted joy, sunshine bright, girl and boy. Bag of tricks and candy sticks, peppermint kites for my toy. Yellow brick, black bold black. Keep on walking and don't look back. I walked along happy and then came back. I followed the yellow brick road. Lost and found, I saw you down. Altar bound, tossed the gift of love. The yellow brick road took my load. Sunshine girl, come to my abode. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 miles long. Oh, I can't ever go wrong. Clouds are gray and yesterday. Devil on my shoulder, there's time to play. Yellow brick, black wall black. Keep on walking and don't look back. Around the corner the wind blew back. Follow the yellow brick road. It ended up in black bold black, tossed the gift of love. Smiling children painted joy, sunshine bright, girl and boy. Bag of tricks and candy sticks, peppermint kites for my toy. Yellow brick, black wall black. Keep on walking and don't look back. I follow the yellow brick road. I follow the yellow brick road. I follow the yellow brick road. I follow the yellow brick road now. I follow the yellow brick road. I follow the yellow brick road. I follow the yellow brick road.
Yes, Yellow Brick Road. Hope no one was expecting Elton John there. That was an older gentleman, Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band. Very big in this country around that time.
But yes, but never really made in America.
That's
They went on
astonishing.
tour with us a couple of years back, and it was really all uphill for them because they were pretty well unheard of throughout most of America. A little bit known in LA and a little bit in New York, but nowhere else. But of course, very big over here. And it was rather sad, I think, that they broke up recently because Don never used to pay them. He had a Corvette Stingray and a fur coat for his missus, but the group were like living on hamburgers, you know.
Dear.
It was that, a little bit unfortunate.
You came across them again recently?
Yeah, I set out to find them when I was in the States about a year ago, you see, when I heard they broke up, and I found them all living apart and, you know, stopped playing music, living out in the desert, and persuade them to have another bash, you see, on their own, without Don. And we, Jethro Tull, sort of dragged them over to this country and paid for their recording a master for an album, and lent them the equipment and so on and so forth. And they have actually just had a record released from those sessions, and they're now called Mallard. So one hopes that it might do well for them, and that maybe one day they'll get back with the Magic Captain and do it all again. But I'd love to see that particular song re-released as a single. I think it would really...
But despite this new album, they've now split up again, I think he said.
So it seems they've, you know, I think probably, you know, and without money, you know, they really can't live, and they don't have the... They can't get out and play because no one in America knows them.
True. Let's start the second side of your top 12 selection anyway, Ian, with the Stones.
Oh, yes, indeed. This was, I suppose, their first biggie, and they angered almost everyone with what seemed then to be very long hair, but when you look at pictures these days, it's shorter than yours, I would say. And,
it's impossible.
Rubbish. Yeah, quite trendy.
Bald is more like it.
Well, we all have that problem. Not Fade Away, the Rolling Stones.
A jolly little tune from the Stones there, Not Fade Away. We haven't talked at all so far about your writing, Ian. Is it fair to say that in many of Tull's albums you seem to show an incredible sort of sympathy, predilection for the losers, not the dropouts, but the hard done by, the down and outs? They seem to feature time and again in your work.
Well, I suppose like anybody who's achieved some measure of success, I'm afraid of that sort of thing happening to me. Indeed, it's probably just my luck that I'll end up being, you know, some kind of a dropout.
But it couldn't now, could it? Couldn't it?
Well, very easily, yes, very easily. Yes, if you had my tax problems, don't forget I live in England, you know, you'd realise how close you are. The profit margin is absurdly small, really.
Yes.
I mean, you know, one minute you have an enormous bank account, the next minute when you've paid all the expenses for a tour and making an album, you're down to zero, you know. It's really quite frightening. Money comes in and disappears again in seconds almost. But,
yes,
you know, one hopes that I could always make a living, I suppose, being a record producer, or they might even give me a telly show if I keep smiling.
But that has somewhat sidestepped the issue that I raised there.
Yes, I did do that neatly, didn't I?
Yes,
or actually not so neatly, because you caught me.
Does it stem from a sympathy, or almost from a sort of could I say, a guilt feeling that you know, you've done remarkably well?
Maybe it's even guilt, except I'm one of those people who does tend to sort of, you know, if I see somebody busking in the street, I tend to sort of walk past and then think, and turn around and sneak back again and, you know, throw some money in.
Oh, you do at least go back, yeah.
Yes, I do, and it's always very embarrassing to go back and do it, you know. I feel that people are watching me and, you know, whatever, thinking, why doesn't he give more? Or something, you know, but it's, yes, perhaps it is guilt as well. I mean, no one has a right to make a lot of bread. My only excuse is I don't hang on to it for very long, you know.
Silly. All right. Well, now, let's get on to the next choice. Does the appeal here lie in the lyric or in what?
Yes, I think it really lies in the era, because I think all of these songs that I've chosen say something about eras of pop music, you know, within that sort of 10 years or so that I've chosen. This particular song is from that very psychedelic sort of period of time when the Beatles first got off their catchy little 3-minute songs, which everybody loved, and started doing some weird and sometimes quite wonderful things. I think probably to a lot of people this would represent the Beatles' artistic heights anyway, or the period of time. This one's called I Am the Walrus.
Beatles and particularly John Lennon and the Walrus. Before we leave the field of contemporary lyric writing, do you think that pop, rock, call it what you will, should have any sort of purpose, any serious purpose in its lyric content, Ian?
Well, I think sometimes pop or rock or whatever you call it reflects an awful lot about the day and the age in which we live. Sometimes it's intended to and is lucky enough to succeed in manipulating fashions and trends.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, this is obviously a very different category where I think there is some, well, obviously a lot of artistic merit in that sort of lyric writing and that sort of musical arrangement, because it becomes instantly very surrealist in its approach. It's conjuring up an awful lot of dissociated images and little musical ideas about which the listener can form a variety of conclusions and draw his own picture, you know, his own overall picture to what the song is about. And I think that's fun. I think that's why, you know, that obviously a lot of people like abstract art.
Yes,
because it doesn't give you a black and white message, it gives you a way in to an experience.
I've noticed from interviews with your friends, the critics, that you are frequently badgered to explain what you mean by a certain song, certain lyric.
Yes, and sometimes I just have to honestly say, well, I don't know what it means. If I knew what it meant, I probably wouldn't have written it. You know, but one attempts, not so much now, I'm going through a different stage in my life at the moment, but a couple of years ago I was writing rather enigmatic sort of pieces because this sort of word imagery I felt very important at that time. It was, and I know a lot of the fans, especially a lot of the very young fans, like that kind of style because they, at that tender age, being relatively unafraid to use their imaginations, enjoyed the challenge of that sort of music to listen to and to analyze perhaps in some way. But I think they also got a certain gut level reaction from it as well. And I think possibly the people who tend to be my, or to an adverse extent, my critics, some of the people who've been in the business for, you know, a few years, who like their music nice and simple because it's easier to meet that Monday morning deadline when you've got to write about it, you know. That's a nasty thing to say, but then sometimes I am quite nasty when people are nasty to me. And, but everything's all right now, and I'm writing nice and simply at the moment about things that everybody understands, and we'll see what category I fit into next.
Indeed. What have you chosen for us next?
Well, I've chosen something which is another, back to that R&B thing, which most of these songs seem to fit into one way or another. This one was a very big song for Free at a time when we were all having our first and second albums out, I think. This one is the very famous All Right Now.
Home to my place, watching every move on her face. She said, look, what's your name, baby? Are you trying to put me in shame? I said, oh, don't go so fast. Don't you think that love can last? She said, love, Lord above. Now you're trying to trick me in love. All right now, baby, it's all right now.
course, was Free. You said at the beginning of this program, Ian, that you were now back in England with a vengeance. Are you here for very long?
Forgive the pun, but backing Britain with a vengeance, since I'm really here to pay off my rather enormous tax liability. I didn't run away with the money, like so many others. I'm a good boy, waving my miniature Union Jack, as I say this. But no, I'm here to pay for the right to live in the country, and that's basically what I'm here for, to sort out 7 years' worth of accumulated tax demands.
But not, therefore, to work very much. We're not going to be able to see.
Oh, no, I'm here working. I mean, this is the first time I've ever been engaged on doing what, forgive the word, dear public, but, you know, promotional sort of things. I mean, it's this, we're out here, or I'm out here, in here, back here, out here. I think I'm coming from somewhere else. I'm home, you know, doing tellies and radios and things, which I haven't done for 5 years. Largely, I really would like to say, because no one ever asked me before. Or if they did, the message never got through.
Well, you weren't here to be asked, you see. How much time did you spend abroad?
That's probably one of the reasons, but of course, you know, it would have been nice to have been asked anyway, wouldn't it, you know?
You've got a new album, which is now completed.
Yes, indeed, which is, the album is actually all finished and wrapped up in its neat little package, which you're going to love.
When's it going to be released?
May 1.
Okay, before we come to the next track, though, very quickly, are we going to see Jethro Tull in concert later in the year?
Well, yes, indeed, about probably the end of August, beginning of September, when we'll be doing Britain again.
Good news, right. What's for us next?
Well, next we've got one of our contemporaries, in as much as they used to play same old club circus as we did in Britain. And I seem to remember them being on Top of the Pops around the same time, way back when. And sadly, without their old lead guitarist, who of course was very, very good. This is a song I think he wrote, and wrote very well. It was a style which he really only did once, but lovely song called Man of the World, Fleetwood Mac.
Shall I tell you about my life? They say I'm a man of the world. I've flown across every tide. I've seen lots of pretty girls. I guess I've got everything I need. I wouldn't ask for, and there's no one I'd rather be. But I just wish I had never known. And I need a good woman to make me feel like a good man should. I don't say I'm a good man, oh, but I would be if I could. I could tell you about my life and keep you amused, I'm sure, about all the times I cried, and how I don't want to be there anymore, and how I wish I was in love.
Fleetwood Mac, and a very beautiful record indeed, Man of the World. If I can take you up on just one more point that you mentioned earlier, Ian, you did say that your particular part of the music sphere was little or nothing to do with show business, although that had been contradicted by various people.
Well, of course it is show business now, and as much as we go on, we know we're going to be at a certain place to play, and we wear special clothes for going on stage and get all nice and sweaty every night. Yeah, I mean, show business in that sense, but we try not to now as much as ever, you know, be slaves to the to other people's fashions.
Oh, right, fine. But you nevertheless did introduce quite an element of flash, or call it what you will, didn't you? I mean, with bizarre costumes and spinning around on one leg whilst playing and that sort of thing.
Yes, but that's a sort of, I would hope that that's some kind of native wit rather than a contrived gambit for becoming successful.
But it's showmanship as opposed to just...
Yes, yes, indeed, but the pressure is always on you as soon as you become known for something like that to deviate from it and do something else, because it becomes a tremendous cliche in your own mind.
Yes.
You don't want to keep doing the same thing, and yet to an extent you enjoy doing some of the same things, and in a way you have to, because people want to see that.
Yes.
So it's a peculiar, very unsettling way of treading on your own toes half the time, and at the same time taking headlong flights into oblivion with attempts to do something different, some of which obviously are doomed to failure. And I've, you know, made a lot of mistakes doing things, but I don't regret them because they had to be done, you know. One has to keep trying to change things rather than allowing you know, the fashion of today's music to dictate the way you must play.
Right.
Which indeed is what the next song, indeed the next album, which is one of ours, definitely my favourite song at the moment, indeed, is really all about, because it's talking about the difficulty of being left behind by changing fashions, but it has rather an optimistic end, because fashion, like everything, like music itself, is very cyclic, and I think the character in this particular story, the old rocker, who has something in common with me, gets a nice surprise at the end, because fashion catches up with him again, and the winkle pickers and the leather jackets and the long hair come back into fashion. He's suddenly a hero again, you see. The title came to me sitting on an aeroplane after particularly in the middle of an American tour, actually, and the plane was going through some rather rough weather, and I was a bit depressed, and sitting up there in the front with you know, clutching a early morning bourbon, was thinking dejectedly to myself, you know, that I was getting a bit past all this charging about, and thought, you know, wrongly, I must add, I thought, you know, I'm really too old to rock and roll. And then the plane gave a lurch, and I quickly added, but I'm too young to die. And from that rather smart title, you know, I took that into first of all this song, and then wrote the rest of the album, or indeed a story, from which the other songs derive, by the same name. And here it is: Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die.
Yesterday's dream, the transport cab, profit of doom, ringing no change in it, a double turn seems it is, her suave in the gloom. Now it's too the rock and roll, body and as he flies, heaven dies. His wind whips west, echo the final take. And he hits the trunk road, doing around 120, with never left to break. And he went to rock and roll, and he was too young to die. Oh, he went to rock and roll, and he was too young to die. No, yeah, I never do the rock and roll. If you're too young to die, and you never get off, and never do the rock and roll. But he was too young to die.
And that was Jethro Tull with Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die.
Apologies to dear John Barry for the pizzicato violins, which is where we came in, right?
Indeed it is. And you say you've now got over that sort of feeling of depression about being a rock and roller, or have you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one gets that every morning, I think,
Yeah.
really. You know, some point in the day, I think, you know, I really ought to be digging roads or something else, you know, for a living. But, you know, that happens, at least every day.
There are all too many musicians in the rock field who fall by the wayside because of the pressures of travelling, yet Tull must be one of the most widely travelled bands in the business, I should think.
Yes, and yet, in a strange way, I think that's one of the things that's kept us going, because we have worked. You know, we've kept on the road and kept doing things, and I think that is probably the most, the single biggest factor for staying together and keeping going. It breeds enthusiasm, you know, just in itself. I think too long away from touring, too much leisure time and so on, one would then start to develop interests and hobbies outside of playing music, which might therefore lead to other activities. But I don't really do anything else other than play music. And
But other members of the band do?
they have a little bit more time than me, you know, to dig the garden and, you know, play around with boats and cars and things of that sort. But, you know, I mean, they're probably better at coping with that than I am, actually. You know, I have a compulsion to do what other people call work, but of course to me it's play, it's what I do for fun.
Great. I hope you'll continue to do it for a very long time. Let's have your final choice of music on this set.
Yeah, well, another one of the another one of the Long Hair Brigade from way back. Of course, all now doing other things, but although there was some recent talk about them playing together again. The Nice with an instrumental that did rather well called America.
And regrettably, we don't have time for any more of that very long track by Nice, but pleasant to hear that much anyway. Ian Anderson, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Brian.
Here's another old rocker that I've heard rumours is reforming, Alan Freeman.
It's very true. Thank you very much, Brian. Happy Easter to you, and thank you, Ian. And that was very nice, as a matter of fact.